Okay, welcome back. Peace be unto you. We're back on number 19 series again, but this time a slightly different tact, slightly different series, video 2000 series. So in this one, we're going to look at these mysterious initials that are in certain number of Quranic chapters. They are called Huroof-al-Muqattaat. Basically, literally means disjointed letters. So you see these letters like Alif, Lam, Mim, which is the second chapter, for example, which has the three initials, A, L, M, if you want to call it in English. But in this particular series, we're going to look at around two surahs 50, Surah Qaaf, which is named after its own initial, and Surah 42, which has five initials in it, Ham, Mim, Ain, Sin, Qaaf, basically HM, a heavy A, a Sin, S sound, and then the heavy Qaaf. So the Q is in there. We're going to use these terms interchangeably, the Qaaf or the Q, but the Arabic letter itself is Qaaf. It's a heavy Qaaf, right? So away we go with these Quranic initials. Now, these two chapters that I just mentioned, chapter 50 and chapter 42. Chapter 50 is known as Surah Qaaf, which is the letter itself, and chapter 42 is Ham, Mim, Ain, Sin, Qaaf. So again, these disjointed letters, they don't have any word meaning, but they're there. People have always sort of wondered about its significance. There's probably a particular significance around its encoding. There's a way you can verify it, but I'm not saying that that's absolutely the only thing it does. So in this series, obviously, we're being very objective and using technology and SQL. So we'll SQL the Quran, we'll verify the claims that people have made around these mysterious initials, and particularly to do with 9 claims on the letter Qaaf and its interplay or its patterns with number 19. And if we see any bonus patterns along the way, I'll call it out as well. Now, if you haven't seen my video setup, video 000, which is pertaining to how the database that I've modeled, the entity relationship diagram, and how the details of the data set and the database design and what tools and all that I'm using, the deep dive of that is in another video. If you want to watch that, that'll really help, but come along for the journey anyway. Now, visually, before last time I just presented those claims, they're very number based and all that, so I thought this time I'd take a different approach and present these claims visually, so I can really set and embed in your thought as you go through what these claims are about. So as you can see, chapter 50, chapter 42 on the x-axis is showing that the claim is that in chapter 50 there are 57 letter Qs, the Qaaf, right? The number of Qaaf in chapter 50 is 57. And the 3 is signified by the fact that if you divide 57 by 19, you get 3. So 19 and 3 are basically factors of 57. And 19 obviously being the base number around which all this numerology is being spoken of in these videos. Now similarly, chapter 42, the other Q initial chapter. So there's only 2 Q initial, or Qaaf initial chapters in the Quran, chapter 50 and 42. So chapter 42, again, the claim is that it has 57 Qaafs in them, and the letter Q, the letter heavy K, right? Now, that if you add the two 57s, you end up with 114. So the significance of the letter Qaaf, people are saying, these scholars or researchers saying, that it potentially alludes to the Quran. The Qa, which is the first letter of the word Quran, is probably alluding to the Quran. So, and the Quran has 114 chapters, therefore the 2 Qaaf chapters, total number of Qaafs in them lead to a number which is equivalent to the number of chapters in the Quran. Obviously, if 57 is divisible by 19 by 3, if you total it up, 114 is also going to be divisible by 19. So that's the visual claim made by, and I'm going to refer to the book. There's 2 books I'm going to use this time for these claims. Now, claims 7 and 8, visually to represent that, basically there's an interplay between the chapter and the number of verses. So, for example, in this diagram, chapter 50, it's saying that in it there are 45 verses, and if you total 50, the chapter number and the verse count, you end up with a number 95. Now 95, if you divide by 19, again that base encoding number, you get a whole number 5. So 19 and 5 are factors of 95. Now 19 itself is this wonderful number that the whole series is based on. Similarly, chapter 42, if in it the claim is it has 53 verses, and if you add the chapter number with its number of verses, you end up with a number 95. Again, this is a mirror pattern. You can see that it's basically mirroring 50 and 42. The two Q initial chapters are mirroring themselves. Both are 95 in total when they add the chapter number, its verse count. And then if you divide 95 by 19, it's 5, which signifies that it's a multiple of 19. So that's a visual representation of the claim. Again, another claim in there, it's easy to see it visually, claim number 9. So in this claim it says, and it's not to do predominantly with these two chapters, it's to do with the entire Quran. If you take the number of Qa'fs, or the Qaaf, or the heavy K, that alphabet, if you count the Qa'fs in every verse 19, so any chapter that is more than 19 obviously, or equal to 19, and there's quite a few of them, as you can see these little bubbles here are the chapter numbers from 1 to 114. Obviously towards the end of the Quran you have much shorter chapters, so you're not going to hit chapter 19 in those. So you can see that these chapters where the bigger circles are, the bigger number of Qa'fs in them, but this big circle here signifies the total number of Qa'fs in the chapter 19, and that is 76. The significance of that is that 76 is a multiple of 19, so 19 multiplied by 4. So that's some of the key claims in this. I'm going to represent this a little bit like this. These are the 9 claims. They're made in these two books, and I showed you the book before. This is the book by Dr. Rashid Khalifa. Both the books are by him. Quran, Visual Presentation of the Miracle, and the other one is Quran, the Final Testament. This is the other one. So both the total number of claims made in this are basically made in those two books. Okay, and I've represented the names over here. Now chapter 50, the first claim, let's look at it again, and hopefully the visual picture that I presented before is going to help you understand this. Claim number 1 is chapter 50, which is the Qaaf chapter, contains 57 letter Qaafs, right? So 19 multiplied by 3 basically is what 57 is. Similarly, chapter 42 has 57 Qaafs, and therefore 19 by 3. I'm going to say Qaaf or Q just for my Western audience if you're not used to the Arabic alphabet. And Q, SP 51, there is a verse in the first verse of chapter 50. It signifies that Q stands for the Quran, and both Q chapters is equal to 114, which is the number of chapters in the Quran, and 114 is obviously 6 times 19. So again, the interplay on 19. Now the fourth claim is that the chapter 50, first verse describes the Quran as glorious, and the Arabic word there is Majid, and the 4 letters MJYD in English, if you like, or Mim, Jim, Ya in Dal in Arabic has a geometrical value of 57. So we'll do gematria later on. You can go to Wikipedia and look at gematria. It'll explain, the Abjadi Arabic word order, the alphabet order, and the weighting that it uses. So Alif has a weighting of 1, Ba has a Alif weighting of 2, and so forth. And then basically what it's saying is the geometrical value of these 4 letters, which represent the glorious, the Majid, as the Arabic word, it is a total of 57, so which is also 19 by 3. Now there's a little exceptional noting here about that consistently when the Prophet Lot is mentioned in the Quran, it refers to his people or his progeny or his his followers, or people that were not his followers but his immediate, I guess, locals, the Qawm, the people of Lord Lut, is constantly referred to as Qawm, which has a heavy Qa'f in it. Whereas the one unique occurrence in chapter 50 doesn't use the heavy Qa'f word, and that's to do with holding the integrity of this number 19 principle. We'll get to it, and that's one of the claims made. That's one of the significance of why Quran is precise with which words it's used where, because there's also a mathematical underlay, foundational mathematical method at play as well. Now, claim number 6 is the Quran itself. The Quran mentioned in Quran 57 times. So we'll do a query on that to validate that. Number 7 and number 8 are very similar. We had a look at that. Basically, the chapter number, and you add the number of verses and you get a number, which is in this case chapter 50 has 45 verses, you end up with 95. 95 is divisible by 19 exactly. The other chapter 42, the other Qaaf chapter, I guess, has 53 verses, so 42 plus 53 is 95, again divisible by 19. Now, in the last claim that's made in the book, that all chapters, it's actually made in the second book, the Quran, the Final Testament. If you count all the Qaafs, the letter Q, the heavy K, in all verse 19s of all chapters of the Quran, you'll end up with 76, which is also divisible by 19 exactly 4 times. So this is the significance of all these claims is around chapter 52 and chapter 50 and chapter 42, but also around the letter Qaaf. Okay, so these are the 9 claims. Now let's go and actually do the thing that I have set up the database to do to verify all these claims. Again, we're looking at the letter Qaaf, which is written in Arabic like that. Now in the database, we have used a model where obviously there's a 1-to-1 reference between an Arabic letter and an English letter, because in this data set they have used the number 9 for that heavy sound, but as long as the pattern is there. So just so that you're aware of the use of 9 in the transliteration. It doesn't make any difference. We could have used anything, but it needs to be unique in the matching from Arabic to English. Okay, now let's go over to SQL. Now, as per before, just a very quick intro. These are the key tables in the database. So I've got a database diagram up. Chapters. A chapter has many verses, the verse table. Then we have a chapter is revealed in a particular city. There's a relationship between those 2 tables. Then I have 2 aggregate tables around word. So this is my really like an aggregate table that the system has crawled through and determined all the different words they use, where they use, its total count, its chapter, its verse, all that wonderful information. Then I similarly have 2 character count tables. In fact, I have 3. One is the base character table where all the characters are stored, and then their references are to a char count, which is basically a character count table about everything to do with every letter used in the Quran, and the char count references are more about every letter in which position it is used in the Quran. So I've done an explanation very quickly here. If you want to know more about this, you'll have to watch my database setup video. Okay. Now what we'll do next is I'll go and open up the queries that are going to be used for this exercise. I'm just going to open all of them. Right. Go and have a look at the metadata. Right, so as per previous sort of pattern and cadence that we've got, I'm going to go slowly through each of the queries. First, I'm going to introduce a basic metadata sort of check so that people are comfortable about what I'm doing. So over here, we have a database called Q, which is my Quran database. We're going to now quickly have a look at the 2 chapters. So basically I'm doing a select on the chapters table, and I'm saying just show me the 2 chapters that we're interested in, chapter 42 and chapter 50, right? and it will show us that chapter 42 and 50 here. One is called Ash-Shura, which I believe the translation stands for the consultation. And as you can see, chapter 50, the Arabic name itself is just the letter Qaaf, which is the initial. Now you can see also over here that these two chapters have these Quranic initials. One's a longer one, Ha Mim Ain Sin Qaaf, so it's got 5 initials, but it does have the Qaaf in it. And chapter 50 itself is the Qaaf initial. Again, this transliteration over here, which is basically a representation in transliterated English, if you like, for one-to-one correspondence. So that's where I was saying a Qaaf is represented by number 9. And there's some other metadata here about this, these two chapters in the chapter table, right? Now, let's also look at all the chapters that have what's called these has isolated letters, the Huroof-al-Muqattaat phenomenon, right? Just so that you can see that there is no other chapter other than these two, which I've limited it to saying which contain the Qaaf in it. So there is 29 chapters that have the, if I can just do one without that query. So this time I'm not putting the extra filter to limit to only the initials Qaaf. Let's just have a look at all the chapters in the Quran that have these Huroof-al-Muqattaat, or these disjointed letters, or these mysterious initials, and you will see it returns. I'm going to the messages field, 29 rows, which means 29 chapters have this phenomenon. Let's go to the results tab, and you can see that starts from the chapter 2, Al-Baqarah. It has these initials Alif Lam Mim, and you can see as you go down all the way to chapter 68, Al-Qalam, which has Noon. But chapter 50 here, the two ones that we're interested in, and chapter 42, these are the only two ones that have the letter Qaaf. Because if I put the filter on, you can see that it says, well, of all the Arabic initial chapters, only 2 have contained the letter Qaaf in them as the Arabic initials, right? Now let's go and just view, just have a quick look and have a feel for what the verses table. This is where all the heavy lifting is. The verses are contained in the verses table. So I'm going to select from everything from the verse Q_verse table, where chapter is 42 and 50. So I'm limiting it to that. I'm just doing some ordering here so things appear in the right order for us. As you can see, chapter 50 verse 0, which is the Bismillah, which is the beginning, in the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, for example, and it goes all the way, so chapter 50 keeps going, so you can see all these are verses from chapter 50, and then towards the other half, then it starts again with the 42nd chapter, again with another Bismillah, which is the verse 0, and you can see, starts with Hamim, the first 2 initials, and then the second verse is where the Ain Sin Qaaf, where the Qaaf comes in, whereas for chapter 50, it was the very first verse where the Qaaf is. You can see right here, that's the disjointed letter just sitting there by itself. Okay, so now that you've had a good preview and understanding of these 2 chapters, we'll start to go into the queries. Okay, now the first claim is that chapter 50 contains 57 Qaafs, right? So, and we'll do another one about the use of that Qawm versus Ikhwan, which is the issue around why, for some weird reason, generally when Lot, the Prophet Lot, or Lut in Arabic, is referred to, his people always call Qawm, which uses the heavy Qaaf, but in a particular instance it uses the word Ikhwan, which also means, like, you know, the brethren or the community, but it's weird why it didn't use Qawm in that. So there's a reason scholars are attributing to that. Now in chapter 50, let's have a quick look at the chapter table. You can see I've done a query to limit the rows in chapter table to just chapter 50. Obviously I'm going to get 1 row, which is 1 chapter's information. You can see it has the isolated letters. It obviously has the Bismillah, The revelation city is one, which would be Mecca, and Arabic Quranic initials is the letter Qaf. Its English equivalent is the number 9 in the transliteration that I'm using. Right, so that returns us that chapter. Again, we saw that before, but let's just have another review. Now, what we're going to do is look at chapter 50, verse number 1. Now, straight away, you can see that the Qaf, the 9, is sitting at the front, which is then, it says, Qaaf by the glorious Quran, is the translation. It's God is taking an oath by the glorious Quran. So, Qaaf wal Quran al-Majid, right? Majid is glorious. Now, I just want to show you the character table so you're aware of this transliteration between Arabic and the English that I've used. Now you can see the Arabic letters are here and the English representations are here. When we get to the letter Qaaf, which is the 19th over here, it has a English character representation of 9 in our data set, and it is abjadi order of 19, has a geometrical value of 100. Okay. So this is just some metadata about the letter Qaaf. Now, just the other thing I wanted to show you a little bit of maths here. If you divide 57 by 19.0, you get 3. So basically 19 times 3 will get 57 as a whole number. So that shows that 57 has got these two factors, 19 and 3. The main thing there is showing that the 19 is the base number. Okay, now let's review this claim. And what I've done here is to work out the claim which says that there are a certain number of Qaf in this chapter. I'm going through the verse table, right? Then for every, and I'm limiting the chapter number 50, excluding verse 0, the Bismillah verse. I'm then only doing a sum of the number of times, the letter Qaf is present in that text, or every verse, of chapter 50, right? That's basically that particular code there is doing. I'm doing an English equivalent. So I'm also doing the transliteration, replacing Qaf with a space, and then you do a count and you subtract. Basically, it's a neat little way to work out how many times something occurs. So that's basically what it's doing. It's actually trying to work out how many times Qaf, or the 9 English equivalent, is occurring in these chapters. So I'll just run this. You should get multiple fields for cross-check. You can see straight away. In chapter 50, Qaf in Arabic, 57 in English, number 9 represented that 57. So again, we know 57 is divisible by 19 by 3. So the method that we're trying to, or the claim we're trying to prove, is true. Okay. Now I've used the len function, which is a system function. What I'm going to do next is do it another way. Basically, if you've seen what I've been doing, I repeat a couple of checks in different ways so that people are comfortable with the method. So this time I'm going to use some user-defined functions. When given a character ID in a chapter and a verse number, it'll return the number of occurrence of that character ID. So just so that you know that character ID 19 is in fact Qaf in the character table. So that's where my 19 is coming from. I'm actually using the ID of Qaf and saying, okay, how many times does this character occur in chapter number, verse number, right? And verse number, I'm not limiting it. So that's why it's only saying chapter 50. So all of those verses, right? Run that. Once again, you can see we get 57. So we double checked it that the Qaf occurrence in chapter 50 is in fact 57 times. Now I've also got my char count table, okay, my super duper aggregate table, in which we've already pre-run through the database, and it's actually done all the aggregates of every chapter, every word, every verse, and all that. So char count is where all the char character alphabet information is stored. So I'm just going to do a sum of the Arabic letter count and the equivalent English for that. And we're also going to do a division by 19 just to show if we get a whole number, right? So here we go. Run that. You can see both the Arabic and the English letter counts for Qa'f are represented in the different fields in the data set is in fact 57, and you can see I've done the division here, a double or a float division to show that it is a whole number and not a fraction. So that proves that again. And just to show how it comes up with 57 a little bit more detail, where I inner join my char count table with the actual character table, so you can see now you'll see a listing this time. You can see how the accumulation of 57 happened. And that's basically says in chapter 50, verse number 1, the letter Qaaf, which is represented by ID of 19, occurred twice. So these are what are tallied up. These 2 and the English count here, and these are the 2 characters that are used to represent in English the Qaaf, in Arabic, and then in English. And you can see these numbers here, basically all of these are telling up to be 57, which is what I've done exactly same query, but this time I've just listed it out so you can see that how the method was. So literally in all of that, what we've proven is yes, 57 is the number of times Qaaf occurs in chapter 50, and obviously 57 is divisible by 19 by an exact 3. Now this other notion about the Qawm of Lut or the Ikhwan of Lut, 2 different words that are used. Now I just want to show you, we'll just do an English-based query on the verses chapter, where the English meaning contains something like the people of Lot, or in Arabic Lut. I'll just run this so you'll see what I mean by that. So it returns 7 rows in this case, right? And you can see what the claim is this. In each of these chapters, 38, 50, 50 being the chapter that we're interested in, but there's a whole bunch of other chapters here where Lut or Prophet Lot is mentioned. But you can see that every time his people are mentioned, the word used is Qawm Lut, right? Which is like a 9WM LW6, which is the representation here of the people of Lot. Now I'm going to skip this chapter 50 row just so that we can go through again here. Those who understand Arabic, Qawm Lut, you can see 9WM LW6. Once again over here, 9WM and LW6 here, right? But it's people, and then again same thing, uses the word Qawm again. Make that a little bit longer, a long chapter, right? Qawm Lut right at the end. Over here, Qawm Lut again, Qawm Lut. So basically people of, and the trans English meaning you can see over here, it's got various chapters about Thamud and the people of Lot and companions, and then again people of Lot, again people of Lot, people of Lot, people. However, in chapter 50 it uses a different way to describe this, and it uses Ikhwan. Now it has a different spelling. The point being, what's the point they're trying to make here? It's in the English transliteration, it's the brethren of Lot. So this is the only chapter. The point being is this: if Qawm Lot was used here, Qawm Lut was used here, the count of the Qaafs would have been 1 more. And the reason, probably from a mathematical sense, and this is a multi-layered Quran, right? The divine being the most infinite in intelligence, in conscience, in magnificence, and all of those things, in justice, in majesty, in mercy, in his wisdom and his knowledge, or it's God is genderless. That God has given us this revelation. So the point made here is the reason Ikhwan is used, because if Qawm was used, the calculations for the number of Qaaf in Surah 50 in Lot, in Surah Qaaf, Surah 50, would have been out by 1. That's the point that's been made here. There's no other chapter other than one reference of 50. And the point is that if the Qa'f was used to represent Qawm, of the people of Lot, instead of Ikhwan, which is the brethren of Lot, then all of a sudden, this phenomenon of this, all that we've just proven in here, wouldn't have been the case. So that's one of the claims made in the book, and we've just verified that. Okay, now we're going to go to chapter 42 this time, which is again another Qa'f initial surah. It contains 57 Qa'fs according to this claim. There's just a little bit of metadata here. The chapter is Ash-Shura, which is the consultation. It is the one of two Q initial chapters, obviously with the Ha, Mim, Ain, Sin, Qaf. It's twice as long. The point being here is that it's not that the other Qaf chapter 50 was this much, so the Qafs in there is quite easily going to be mapped. But no, this chapter is much longer, and yet it's attesting to this phenomenon upholding. Okay, now in the book, this is called out as physical fact number 24 on pages 81 and 85. Now what we're going to do, once again, very similar approach. We're going to look at the chapter chapter 42, and you can see some metadata about it. Its chapter is Ash-Shura, Revelation City. It has the isolated letters, and it has those Quranic initials, and you can see in the initials it has the Qaf in it. Okay, now that's the first part done. Now let's just have a look at some of the verses from the verse chapter. I'm going to look at the first two verses because that's where our interest is. And you can see the first verse is very short, Ha-Mim, which is the two initials, H and M if you like. And the second verse is where the other three initials are, and that is where our Qa'f is, the Qa'f that we are interested in. So it is mentioned in second verse of the chapter, right? So it is a Quranic initial for chapter 42. Just to show you a division of 57 and 19, clearly you get 3, right? But that's a little SQL way of doing maths, but I just divided 57 by 19.0 and showed you that if we do get 57, remember it is divisible by 19. Now same thing again, this time instead of our last check was on chapter 50, this time we're doing chapter 42, and we're counting the number of times Qaf is occurring. We're using the system length function, right? That's query. Bingo. Chapter 42, both verification in Arabic and in English, the transliterated form and the Arabic form, Qaf and the 9, both represented here that we get 57. So that's true again. Once again, I want to show you that the ID of the letter Qaf is 19, which is the abjadi order as well. Okay, now because we're going to use 19 in the calculation here, where we have a user-defined function which goes and given a character ID and a chapter and a verse, it will tell you how many times it occurs. If you don't give it a verse number, it doesn't have any limitation, so we're limiting it to only chapter 42, excluding verse 0. Run that. This is again a double verification that in chapter 42 we do have 57 Qafs. Now a third way to do it is my char count table, which I've explained before. It basically contains a aggregate of all the characters used in the Quran. So in this case we're going to say please sum chapter, all the Qafs in chapter 42, do not include verse 0, and which is the Bismillah verse. It wouldn't make a difference because Bismillah doesn't have any Qafs in it anyway. Now to prove it, I can even just take that, comment that out and run this. And you can see it gets 57. Yeah, if I uncomment the Bismillah verse, run it again, you'd still get the same thing. Okay, so chapter 42 does have 57 Qafs in it in this method using the char count table. Summing it up, I'm doing a div here, so I'm showing a div as well, so exactly divisible by 3. Now just to show you a little bit more detail about how I'm doing an inner join of the char count table with the char character table, so you can see that exactly represented. So 42, chapter 42, verse number 1, number of chars of 19, or Qaaf, there's none in verse 1, but in verse 2 you can see one. So this is all the data that is used to count up to get to that 57. These two queries are exactly the same, except over here I've just done a sum, whereas over here I've listed a little bit more, so you can see that there is a method to what I'm doing. Okay, so what we essentially end up with is the last point, which is chapter 42 does have 57 Qaafs in them. So that's that claim done. Now going on to our third SQL here, which is saying that the chapter 50 Qaaf and 42 Ash-Shura contain 57 plus 57 Qaaf. We've already verified that. We've seen that both of those chapters do have 57 each, but the notion here is talking about if you do sum those two 57s, you end up with 114, and 114 being the number of chapters, so there's a significance there, and that is also divisible by 19. So this is a claim that is made in the book. So we're going to run this query here to select the chapters, then also and I'm going to limit to the 2 chapters. We've seen this before, the 2 chapters, the only 2 chapters that have the initial Qaaf in them. Now if I go and show you that, this is where you can see that chapter 42 verses 1 and 2 have the Ha Mim Ain Sin Qaaf, and that's where the Qaaf is. And of course with chapter 50, the very first letter is it, and the Qaaf, and it is a initialed chapter, both of those. Okay, that's chapter 42, 2 verses, and I'm limiting it to just to show you the initial rows. There's obviously many more rows in there. Now if we add 57 and 57 and divide it by 19, you can see we get 114 and 6. So the last 2 is basically to show you that yes, if you did combine those 2 chapters together, the Qaaf chapters, you end up with a phenomenon where the Qaaf in each of these 2 chapters is exactly 57. And if you add those two 57s together, you get 114. 114 representing the number of. This is another way to do it. You can see that this time I'm using the verses table just to prove the same point. And again, one more time, using a little bit more listing. You can see that yes, 57, 57 are the representation of how many Qaafs are in 42 and 50, and they're divisible by 3. So that's the other claim done, that yes, but it was already proven through individually. I have to look at that. Now this time going to look at the new claim here is about using the chapter number and the verse. So basically chapter 50 has 45 verses, chapter 42 has 53 verses, and the claim is if you add those 2 together, you will end up with a number that is divisible by 19. So what does that mean? Let's have a look at the 2 chapters again. We know that Ash-Shura and Qaaf. Now this time again, we're going to show you that these 2 are our initialed Qaaf, and Qaaf is there, the 9 and the 9, as you can see in English. Now if we do the sum of the chapter number and the verse count using the chapter table, so we're adding the chapter number to the verse count of that chapter, returning that as its chapter verse sum, and then we're doing a little div here, same thing, just to show for those 2 chapters only, 42 and 50. What do we get? You can see that we actually get 95 for both. Chapter 42 returns 95, and it's divisible by 19. Right? Let's just show you a different way of doing the same thing. We're going to use the verses table. Now, what is this? This is really the essence of it. Chapter 42 has 53 verses. If you add these two, you get 95. Chapter 50 has 45 verses. If you add the verse and the chapter, you get 95. Obviously, 95 is divisible by 19 5 times. So this is a claim that if you add the chapter number and the verses in that chapter, for these two chapters, you end up with a divisible by 19. And we'll just do another reference of that so you can see clearly that you know that was the phenomenon earlier spoken of. All right, going to go to that one. Go to another claim. So this one is about the geometrical value. The claim is that the first verse of chapter 50 speaks about the glorious Quran. The Majid is the word, Al-Majid, right? Majid means glorious. So it says that the geometrical value of this, given that it's quite profoundly calling out Quran as Majid, the gematria should also be holding some significance around 19. So let's just go and do that. So if you look at the verses here, you can see it says Qa'f wal Qur'anil Majid. So it's saying Qa'f, and there's an oath by God Almighty by the glorious Quran. And the word that they're referring to is Majid, is represented by the Arabic sequence as M, Mim, Jim, Ya, and Dal. So I have taken those four letters and we've done a geometrical value. There's a field called geometrical value in the character table. We do a select and a sum of that. Actually, it does return 57, which we know is divisible by 19. Now, to prove it in the English version of the same letters, the English character, over here I'm using Arabic character from the character table of these Arabic letters. Now I'm using the English letters to represent Majid, M-J-Y-D, and you can see that that also returns 57, and over here a little divide by 19 to show you that 57 divided by 19 is exactly. So that's getting into the gematria. Now this is the last query, and it is talking about the total number of Qaafs, the letter Qaaf in verse 19. So every chapter, verse 19, see the number of Qaafs in it, you calculate it, the total, it actually is a multiple of 19. This is the claim. So total Qaafs in verse 19 of the Quran in total. This is not to do with limitation on chapter 50 or 42. This is the entire Quran, because now it says that the Qaaf is a representation of the Quran and there's a 19 interplay. So therefore, let's have a look at that. Now this query is very simple. It basically says, let's go to the char count table, and wherever the limited to the verse number 19. So this is the criteria. Verse number 19 is what we're after. The char ID, we want only the 19th character, which if you want me to show you once again, that the ID 19 is in fact Qaaf. The Arabic letter Qaaf has an ID of 19 in the table, in the character table, in a denormalized design. So we're referring to that number 19 as a char ID, and we're doing a sum in both Arabic and English, and also the geometrical value. Okay, so this is what it says. Chapter 2, the number of Qaaf ID is 19. It has 2 and 2. So you can see that it lists basically all the chapters here and how many Qaafs it is and its total number of Qaafs, right? So if I just do the same query this time without representing the chapter and the ID, and just do a sum, same thing, sum the number of the Arabic letters, the equivalent English, and I'm also doing a division here for the English version to show that whether it is or isn't divisible by 19. So let's run this, and I'm limiting it to verse 19. There's no chapter limitation here. All the chapters in the Quran, but I'm only interested in verse 19. Only interested in the 19th character, which is the Qa'f character. Let's run that, and voila, we get 76 as the Qa'f. The English equivalent, the number 9 is 76, and it is divisible by 19 exactly 4 times. Now the geometrical value, because I know Qa'f has a gematria of 100 anyway, you can see the geometrical value also will be divisible by 19, right? So 7,600, you divide by 19, you will get 400 exactly. So that is the claim proven. Just do a different way. Let's do another way to verify. This time, instead of using the char count table, my aggregate table, I'm actually going to use the verse table. I'm going to use this user defined function, which calculates the not doing the gematria there, but let's just have a look what it's doing. Okay, it is, at least it is counting the number of alphabets half in the verses table, and you can see again it returns 76, which is divisible by 19 exactly 4 times. Now, bit more detail to say where the 76 comes from. So basically every chapter you can see is going and calculating the Arabic and English characters. They're matching every time, and that's where the 76 comes from, right? That was exactly the same query as the one before, but it's this one is just doing sums. This one's just listing out the chapter number, so you can actually see for each chapter how the breakup is. But if I go back to the summarized version, bang, forget. Okay, same thing again, but this time we're using the transliterated. I'm using the system len function to work out how many times Qaaf occurs. In the verses table, limiting it only verse 19 across the Quran. Bang. Now, this is a bonus claim here. Not a bonus claim, but a bonus finding. If I do this counting of 19s counting of the letter Qaaf in verse 19 of all the chapters, but if I do it from the 50th chapter onwards, so number 50 chapter is basically that important Q initial chapter. It is Surah Qaaf. It is the chapter that represents Qaaf by itself. The other one, 42, had other letters in it, but this is definitely the only chapter that says it's got the Huroof-al-Muqattaat as Qaaf. If we take it from that point onwards and count all the Qaaf in verse 19s, you would be surprised. It actually is 19. The number of times Qaaf occurs onwards from chapter 50. This is really an interesting find. It is exactly 19. Now, and obviously 19 is divisible by itself. Similarly, same query, if we reverse it. Now, what about less than 50? Chapters before 50. So again, all the chapters, we're going to go to verse 19 of that chapter and count the Qaafs in it. And this time we're doing it before chapter 50. Guess what? 57 times. Exactly divisible by 19.3. Again, the method, this is just a bonus sort of thing that I came up with in just doing this. And amazingly, all the claims based on what we had on our PowerPoint, just what we're going to go back to, I believe have been proven to be true. So, in summary, the books that I'm referring to. This one here, Quran, the Final Testament, Rashid Khalifa, Quran visual presentation of the miracle. The claims are in there. You can probably find these claims on the internet, but people will show you visually and show you all the numbers crunched up. I've shown you a very to the data level verification using SQL. Hopefully you enjoyed that journey if you're really an analytical person and like numbers and enjoy that kind of stuff. Hopefully that was riveting for you. So just quick capture on this. Chapter 50, which is the Qa'f Surah chapter, contains 57 Qa'fs. Yes, that was proven, 19 by 3. So the 19 stays true. Chapter 42, this is really interesting, which is the other Qa'f Surah, which has Ha, Mim, Alif, Sin, Qa'f. So it has a Qa'f in it. There's only 2 chapters that have the Qa'f as that mysterious Huroof-al-Muqattaat. And again, 19 by 3. Now, the 2 chapters together, obviously 114, and therefore the number of chapters in the Quran, and therefore also divisible by 19. Now, the word Majid, which is referred to in the first verse of 50, chapter 50, where the Qaaf concept starts, it obviously is referring to, it calls the Quran glorious, and the word is Majid, and therefore the claim was that the word Majid had a grammatical value of 57. It did, so we verified that as well. Now, in terms of the exception that I showed you, the use of Ikhwan, which doesn't have the heavy Qaf, versus Qawm, which has the heavy Qaf, which unilaterally, Qawm is used for reference to Lot, Prophet Lut. And then for some reason in this chapter 50 it isn't, because if it did, then it would throw the count out by 1. So that's probably a mathematical reason why the divine, the most intelligent, the most mathematical being, in infinity in everything, infinity in mercy, infinity in grace, infinity in knowledge, was able to apply that discretion. That's how, you'd want to understand that to be. The Quran, the word itself, the Quran, mentioned in the Quran 57 times, which is showed that as well, that yes, and it's 19 is times 3 gives you 57. Now these 7 and 8 claims are really about those, interplay between chapter number and adding the verses of it, and you get a number which is, again, but in both cases is exactly 95, which is interesting, that mirror pattern between Surah Qaaf and Surah Surah 42, that there is a interesting almost like a ring or a mirror pattern between those two. But anyway, both of those added up to be 95, and they are multiples of 19 exactly by 5. Now, in terms of the last one, we actually had some bonus findings in there as well, that if you just added the Qafs in all verse 19s of the Quran, you ended up with 76, and that was also divisible by 19, so therefore it's a multiple of 19. Now, these are the bonus things that we that I came upon. The letter Qaaf is the 19th letter in the Abjadi order. The Quran is Arabic letters have 2 orders. One's the Abjadi, which is where the weighted numbers come up, and the other one is the Hijai, which is when you learn to read, you use that format. But in the Abjadi order, the letter Qaaf, interesting enough, is the 19th character, 19th in order. The grammatical value of the letter Qaaf in all verses, verse 9 of the Quran, is also 7,600. So that's basically 76 times 100, because Qaaf has got a value of 100. So which is again a multiple of 19. 400 times 19 will give you your 7,600. The sum of letter Qaaf from chapter 50 onwards is exactly 19. In verses 19, by the way. And also, if you look the other way, the sum of letter Qaaf before chapter 50 in all verse 19s is 57, which is 19 times 3. So that's an interesting bonus findings. So again, just a quick wrap up in summarizing. The Qaafs in verse 19s is 76 throughout the Quran. That's 19 times 4. Then over here, Surah Qaaf, if you want to look at it, it has 57 Qaafs in it. If you add its chapter and its verse count, you get 95, and 95 is equal to 19 times 5. The sum of Surah Qaaf, these are the bonus findings in verse 19, from chapter 50 onwards is 19 times. Before chapter 50 is 57 times, 19 times 3. Now when you look at Surah Ash-Shura, the consultation surah, chapter 42, very similar to Surah Qaaf. These are the 2 initial Qaaf surahs, by the way. That's why they're shown here. Again, 57 Qaafs, which is 19 times 3. Its chapter adding its chapter to its verse count, you get 95, exactly the same as the other side, and you get 19 by 5. And just to sum it up, the Quran has 114 chapters, cubing in the interplay here that perhaps this is what I call the golden calf, in terms of not the golden calf from the Tanakh or the Hebrew Bible, but the Qa'f, the letter Qa'f, is really represented in a very mathematical way and sound. All the claims that were made in the two books are astounding. That actually I'm quite impressed that mathematically with SQL I was able to absolutely without any error prove that today. And both of these 57 end up to being 114, which is the number of chapters in the Quran. They're all divisible by 19. The 19 interlocking is still there. So this is really, really impressive. I hope you liked it. I know if you don't like numbers too much, I try to make it as visual as possible, but also having the data points underneath to prove that this isn't just, smoke and mirrors. So that's what I call the golden Qa'f. Now, in conclusion, all 9 claims that are were verified around the number 19 encoding with the letter Qaaf in the initial Qaaf chapters, right? Chapter 42 and chapter 50. I hope you'll never look at these 2 chapters ever the same again. That God, believe that the divine has provided this Quran. There's all these layers in the Quran. I'll have to do a chapter on the various layers of the Quran about linguistic, poetry, the scientific side, the various signs, history, prophecies, all of these layers. And these are the only few things we are discovering, and why the Quran has an imitability challenge that we just don't know how many layers there are. And I'm just saying that this numbers thing is just a slice. It's just a slice of all these layers, just one more layer that really which underpins that every letter, every word has a purpose and a place. It's just not randomly placed there. Why God used Becca instead of Mecca, for example. Today we saw the example where Qawm or Lut is different to Ikhwan or Lut, because if Qawm was used in this chapter, it'd have just thrown the mathematical miracle out of whack. But clearly there's a much higher power here at work from what I'm seeing. I'm really impressed with the first 4 videos that I did on just the number 19, but today the first one on Huroof-al-Muqattaat, this is really, really impressive. And then we had those 4 bonus findings as well, so a total of 13 verification. Now my next video, I'm looking to do just a piece on why 19. So people are going to ask the question, why the number 19? Obviously there's multiple base numbers in the Quran. There's other numerical non-19 phenomena as well, but 19 is a very significant sort of number based on all 4 videos that I've done, both in terms of the verses that were revealed first and the last revelation, the first 3 revelations. Now we have to look at the Qaaf, the initial surahs today, chapter 40 and 42 and chapter 50. So I will do a small video hopefully on why 19, just to explain in terms of numerology what the significance of 19 is. So that's hopefully my next video. If you really were confused about the database, please watch video 000, the Quran SQL DB, which tries to unpack and tries to layman down to a language that hopefully non-IT people can understand. So that is the conclusion. Now, wrapping up the video, if you liked this video and if you understood it, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Again, any comments, any support that you guys give me, it kind of uplifts the morale and makes you want to do more. Gives me a good feel and a warm fuzzy feeling inside that people are liking what I'm doing. This is just my little contribution in terms of an analytical angle. I know there's a lot of good people out there, scholars and both pastors and priests and ulama and imams, but this is a different angle. This is what I know. I know IT, I know SQL and numbers, so I'm gonna do what I know. Again, any feedback, any questions, please post it. If there's any SQL stuff that you want to verify, there's a nice interesting video on the internet about a really nice animation around the Bismillah. I'm hoping that I can unpack it down to an SQL level shortly. That's something I'm interested in. Obviously, I'm running my own track on the number 19 first, And then if there's anything you want me to do, please put a comment in, and I'm happy to look at that. Anytime, please be respectful, be considerate. We're here to learn. I'm here to learn. And my channel is I Reason, Therefore I Am. Thank you so much. Peace be unto you.